Okay, we got the teachers in the hood here, guys, for RS, AB, and myself, behavior trainer. We have the pleasure of talking to the legendary Ross McGill, the legendary,
That was a WrestleMania.
and honestly, like the godfather, yeah? The godfather education. I got my book here, Ross.
All right, a virtual fist bump. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for coming.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And really, I'm going to start with maybe the obvious, but it's a case of, I think a lot of teachers would like to know this. The sort of the face behind the kind of blogs, the Teacher Toolkit website, the support that you do. Just, what was your journey to kind of get there? And you're a teacher, you were a teacher, and then you kind of worked and created this amazing resource bank almost, and so much more. I mean, I think your Twitter has more than 250k followers, teachers. You are known as one of the most influential people in the UK. Accolades that are amazing. And, like I said, it's our pleasure to meet you, and would really love to know how you kind of got here.
It started because I lost my job.
Wow.
And I was in a position where I had to fight to make a living, essentially. So in 2007, I just started my first whole school senior leadership job. So I'd been teaching maybe 18 years at the time. So this is 2007. And I started off writing a diary on a blog, so blogger.com. People used to think I was a bit weird. People still do today, but the blog's now got 17 million readers. It started off as a hobby, so I'd write a blog, just what I was doing in the classroom every half term, nothing kind of regular, I suppose. And I probably wrote about 30 blogs over 2 or 3 years, and it maybe reached about 30,000 views, and I had people reading in all parts of the world, but it was quiet, and it was just something on the side that I looked at now and then. And then my position as a school leader was up for redundancy. There was 5 of us for 2 jobs, and I was quite unhappy in this school, and I was going to be a dad for the first time. So I thought, you know what, it's a good way to leave. Let me just take the money and run. So I think I got 17 years of service, got about £20,000 at the time. So I worked out that I could probably survive on 6 months or something like that before I need to find a job, and I could be a dad and have plenty of time to find a job. And I went straight into teacher training from 19. So I'd been teaching to the age of almost, I must have been 35-ish or around that time. So I needed to spread my wings, I suppose. But unbeknownst to me, when I'd made the decision to take redundancy, voluntary redundancy, and not want to stay, my boy was born premature. So my son, Freddie, this is an old picture of him now. I've got on my desk. I can show you at least on the video. But Freddie was born 1 pound 9 ounces. So imagine holding a small bag of sugar. So that's about 700 grams for people listening. And we were in hospital for 82 days. I'm going to show you guys a picture because you can see on the screen, but people maybe not. People listening will have literally my wedding ring went through his shoulder, up to his shoulder. I slipped his ring straight on.
Wow.
So, life and death. Every time the doctor would come, scan his testicles, is the correct word to say. Scan his brain, scan his heart. So you're waiting for something to go wrong at any point. And we saw other babies not make it. We definitely had 1 or 2 conversations in the medical room. He might not survive the night, all those types of things. But I'd lost my job. I had my wife in emergency cesarean. My son was fighting for his life, and I was 85 miles away from home for 3 months. So I started writing a blog about Freddie's life day to day to update my family, what was going on. And the blog got really popular, and loads of people started to donate premature baby things. So a normal nappy for a baby is massive, but a premature baby, it's like a little doll's nappy. if you put a premature baby in a car seat, they can't fit. So you get a cushion to go around them to hold them in. So we got sent loads of things, and it was very flattering. But it essentially, when he got home and he was safe, and I wasn't teaching for the first time in September 2011, I thought, oh, I've got an old blog. Freddie's blog's gone popular. Why don't I write about teaching again? And that's how it started. So I won the Guardian Award for the Teacher of the Year in a secondary school in 2004, before the Teaching Awards was on the telly. And that's how old I've been doing it now. So I pulled in a card. The Guardian's just started the Guardian Teacher Network, the blog.
Yes.
It's huge now.
Yes.
And I just started to write on there for free for them. And that was good for my profile. And I thought, well, let me get into more writing. So my first couple of blogs were about being a father as a teacher and how that changes your perception of kids, and what it's like to be redundant as a teacher, wanting to teach but not able to.
Yes.
And loads of people, they think you're rubbish, or something wrong with you. Are you a bit difficult to work with? But no, it was just, I always say life gets in the way sometimes, and it makes you have to change your direction. So that's what it was. So the blog really stemmed from circumstances, redundancy, life, and having to kind of redefine my own story as a teacher. 2 or 3 months in, writing at home, I started to apply for jobs, and lots of hiccups and things, but I essentially got a kind of supply teacher version of a school leadership job in a school in Tottenham, where I met this head teacher I was talking to you before I came on, and he restored my faith of teaching and particularly leadership, and not getting scarred, because when you step up to be a leader, you're out of terms and conditions, you're on a different contract, you can work night and day, be told to do all sorts of things. And I loved it. And then I just thought, right, I'm going to keep blogging, but blog every other day about what I was doing. And then at that point, Bloomsbury asked me to write my very first book, 100 Ideas, which is here on the table. Here it is here. You might remember this one.
Yeah. Yes.
So I wrote this.
That stays on my desk.
Yeah, I wrote this in 3 months, and I had cold, flu. I left we were renting in a house at the time. We left. I used to go in on a Saturday morning in school just to get some quiet time away from my son, who was a baby at the time, and just write. And, there's loads of typos and spelling mistakes in here, but the book sold 20,000 copies by Christmas.
Ooh. Wow.
So for me, on a very low contract at the time, it was about £1 or £2 per book. So it cleared all my redundancy debts, allowed us to get a holiday, find a new home. And it was a little eureka moment for me here. What if I just write even more at home about what I'm doing, learn from other people, talk to people? I'm not seeing my mates as much anymore because I'm at home with a premature child. And when you have a premature baby, they take ages to recover from a cold, weeks rather than days.
Yeah.
So your social life changes a little bit. Plus, when you're a parent, your world changes. So I was literally just going in to teach, writing, back, repeat. And then before I knew it, my blog started to spiral, and I moved it from Blogger to WordPress and all sorts. And at that time, all the technology started to evolve, and Twitter was getting a bit more popular. So even in 2010, I think I had about 10,000 followers then, which was a big deal even back then. And it would be today if you had 10,000 followers.
Yeah.
So, it's just become a place now where I've learned from others. And as I read and learn more, I've become wiser, and it just snowballs. So that's how Teacher Toolkit started, gentlemen.
That's amazing. I never realized what the kind of the story was, for that. And such an amazing journey that you went through, and actually difficult.
Very difficult. Yeah, very difficult. Yeah.
But what's emerged from it is something that is amazing. So what emerged from this difficulty, I guess, is something that we're all kind of benefiting from in a sense. So I think it's amazing, it really is.
Yeah, it's sometimes I think I'm writing to myself, but when I see all the statistics and stuff, I know that I'm not. But what's the best thing? And obviously, we've had the pandemic, we've all been stuck at home for 2 years. But I went to a school last week in Peterborough, and the deputy head teacher said to the staff in front of me before I spoke, there's only one thing that's been constant throughout my whole career, and that's Teacher Toolkit. And that was such a flattering thing to know that some people have just always, I forget now that, 3,000 blogs, that's a lot of content, and you can type in any keyword, plenary, school leader, head teacher, toxic school, bullying, and you'll find something in there on it that people can see, well, it's not just me, it's happened to him.
Yes. I think that's what it is. It relates to most teachers.
So it's about sharing stories, being wise, sharing ideas, and it allows people to learn, and we all grow from each other through conversations.
Yeah, I think, Ro, you were going to say something of that, actually.
Yeah, so, like, for me personally, in terms of, when you go to this, do you have, like, a specific agenda that you address the school on? Or are you more trying to inspire them?
That's a good question. I guess there's two answers to that. One, I think I'm most known and what I'm most passionate about is pedagogy. So that's here's the mechanisms that teachers can use to unlock brilliant teaching. Here's the resource. This is how I would use it, or a bit of a pick and mix. Look at all these ideas. Which one do you think might work? And being the DT teacher, I like to model it. I'll show you how I use it, talk about it, play, discuss, repeat, and then here's another idea and I repeat. And it's always just an easy formula. And I guess, having done that my own life as a school leader for 15 years on top of the earlier years of teaching, that leading to CPD for my own staff, 250 staff, you learn what works, what doesn't, what are absolute nightmares, what are dull and dry. Brilliant guest speakers, and then what kind of person I'd like to be if I'm popping into a school for a one-off moment. So that kind of glorified cover teacher. So I guess after having done it over 500 times now, you learn how better, teachers are good speakers anyway, but you learn how to do it more professionally and thoughtfully and slow and engaging, telling stories. And you as a poet, Rowan, you'll know how the power of words and pauses and, how you can connect with people quite quickly. You use the power of emotions. But I think where my connection is in terms of the speaking is, yes, here's some resources, but I thread in my teacher well-being and toxic kind of history, so the redundancy. And that if you choose to work in a tough school, it might be morally calling and fulfilling, but the external forces will come and get you at some point, whether that's Ofsted, workload, mental health, or you lose your job.
Yeah.
So in all aspects of life, or at least in schools, we need all different types of schools, grammar schools, academies, disadvantage, and it's what makes the world tick. You can't have everyone doing the same thing. And every type of child can't thrive in one type of school. But there are circumstances that make some schools happier than others. And it ultimately boils down to the leadership team, regardless of context. Some schools have it tougher than others, for sure. But there are some things that leadership teams can do that, despite the pressures, can still have a happy school, despite it being quite a challenging place in which to work. Reverse that, I could be an absolute idiot and bully you and make you work night and day, make you all use the purple pen of progress, or else you lose your job. And, who's going to work for a person like that? But sadly, some people either do or are forced to or have no choice or are none the wiser. And I think now, having worked with nearly 100,000 teachers since I've been doing my training full time in the last 5 years, I've started to see happiness and unhappiness in different contexts and slowly working out what makes those scenarios happen. So that would be the answer. My kind of subtle conversation throughout my training is the happiness part and unhappiness. Why do you work in your school? What gets you out of bed in the morning? But I guess what I'm delivering is day-to-day strategies that all teachers can try back in the classroom. That practical. I'm super busy. I want to believe you, Ross. I trust you. You've done it before. I can see you've taught before. So give me these ideas that I can try tomorrow. And if any person listening wants a formula for successful CPD, that would be it.
I'm very interested about what you said with regards to well-being. I'm a very, very strong, and we are very strong advocates of teacher well-being. We talk about it all the time, and there is a big shortage right now in teaching, and I think it's growing. And the question I wanted to ask you, Ross, is what advice would you give to new teachers? Some tips maybe that are coming into the profession to stop them from leaving and retaining good teachers. What do you think schools can do to retain and keep these great, amazing teachers? Because they're leaving, and we're not getting enough coming in.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because it seems to be getting worse, and the pattern keeps reoccurring. What I've been doing the last 10 years through my blog and stuff is analysing the teacher workforce data, and 15% of teachers leave in the first year. So we always hear that myth that most teachers leave in the first 5. Well, yes, but the biggest moment where they happen is after year 1. And I have been thinking of late that I wonder if, and this is only because I've been traveling a lot, that many teachers get their QTS and then they disappear and go and work internationally. Or is it after they've taught for a year, they think, this is not for me, it's not what I expected, I'm just leaving, full stop, I'm going to go and do something else. It'll be a mixture of both those things. We've obviously got the new early careers teacher framework out, so that's going to at least give everyone a bit of a framework and a bit of consistency. But, early years, early couple of years of that rolling out, the word on the floor from everywhere I go is it's increased workload exponentially for the mentors, who sometimes don't get enough time or no time at all protected to support them. And you know what it's like when you're an early teacher, you're spending hours doing lesson plans regardless of who tells you the best ideas. So I can say 5-minute lesson plan, whatever, but you've still got to go through that process and headache of learning how a lesson works in 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You've got your subject knowledge that you're accumulating, so you won't know everything, and you won't know how to deliver your subject at A level or Key Stage 1. It takes practice, it takes years. And then you've got all the admin stuff that no teacher training can really prepare you for. Where to stand on break duty, what to do for lunch, where to sit in the staff room, how to raise a concern with the head teacher. Then you just throw in the word safeguard, and that's an enormous minefield. So I just think the nature of teaching, full stop, is it's hard. And even if we gave teachers more time, most NQTs are getting 70% non-contact, then it increases slowly to 90%. But it's just the nature of teaching. It's hard, it's fast-paced, and ultimately, going back to your point on well-being, we're getting better at, and I certainly didn't have this when I qualified, is how to have mental health conversations, how to support your well-being, and how to ask questions, how to listen, how to say no. And more schools have got better HR processes. Not everyone, some of it's still a bit of a car crash in places. We've got well-being policies, we've got well-being budgets. More people are aware now that happy teachers equal happy kids, happy schools. So if we look after our well-being and mental health collectively and know how to support each other, it will lead to better attendance, less staff leaving the school, better morale, and all those things start to become a bit of a kind of repeated cycle. So it's complex, but I suppose one thing I've learned is, for years we used to guess about what well-being looked like in the dark, I suppose. If I changed the policy on behaviour, I didn't really know what impact it had till much later. And I guess now, in a world of ed tech, where we've got lots of bits of software where we can track decisions, data, clicks, if I say X, what happens to Y? We can see as a leader now, if I change the policy on behaviour or time of the day, I can gather staff views through questionnaires and surveys anonymously and see how the mood changes. See if, when I was doing cover as a deputy head for 250 staff at 6:30 every morning, I used to analyse in such detail, not just the positives and negatives, but, you could see which members of staff always took a day off after their birthday. So you start to see who has a hard night out and all those. So it's about the data. You use the data to inform you, to find out things you don't know, and then to take action, whether it's for good or bad. So you can analyze everything today, but years ago when I qualified, it was all paper. So we're much smarter and more efficiently, but the downside of that is when we all qualified, emails didn't exist. Now emails do, and they're not in our terms and conditions. I guess as a society, we now all expect you to answer 50 emails a day on top of your contracted time, which is why we're all swiping on the bus or on the sofa or at the weekend to try and keep up. And that's another minefield, dealing with emails, about how we all improve our behaviors and our expectations of each other, about sending one-word sentences to each other and 5 notifications and whatever else.
Yeah, I think you touched on this before, but with your years of experience, how have you seen teaching change from your first year up to being a leader?
Well, I'll start with basic. I started on a blackboard and I finished on a whiteboard. So, I'm a graphics teacher. I used to have to, on the blackboard, draw it chalk at a time, and when you slide the board over, I'd do here's the finished version, and a big circle to the cleaner. Please don't rub this off. And then I would have to have a large ruler on the board and a giant compass and a big set square, and I'd have to do it one step at a time, get all the kids to copy, move on. And of course, you'd have the odd little photocopy worksheet. Photocopiers in the mid-90s were starting to come into schools, and the one computer in a department, and people were saying, "Oh, look at this email, I can send an email." But when I left, I'd gone through the OHP to the smart board to the interactive whiteboard, and then back to the just simple whiteboard, and then we were moving on to tellies. And you could have multiple things going on and whizzy fast back and forward. So you're moving away from one step at a time where everyone copies and moves forward. And obviously teaching a lot more sophisticated than that, but that was pretty much, at least when you're teaching graphics, that's what you were limited to. Whereas today you can have 30 kids going off into all sorts of, it's a lot more bespoke and differentiated. So it's a lot more refined, quicker. And I guess if you think about what happens in other classrooms, maths, English, PE, I suppose those various methods of 30 kids working at greater speed, it means that it's harder for the teacher to keep up and keep feeding kids with that quick content. Teaching's always been tough. I guess now we're a bit more informed about best strategies. Our brains work much quicker. We've got better ways of responding and meeting kids' needs, but at the same time, you've got increasing mental health, pupils with anxiety. The world's very different now, the social media conversation. So yeah, it's I guess all those things, but I always come back to the same old story, I suppose. You close the classroom door, you got all your devices on, there's one teacher and 30 kids. And it all comes back to simple conversations and how that individual inspires, challenges, motivates, holds the kid to account, tells them off, makes them get homework in the next morning. And you can't bottle that. And that's something that makes teaching a vocation and a craft that's a kind of lifelong process that you learn over the years. And you can be teaching for 10, 15 years, but if you go to a challenging school tomorrow, you're like an NQT all over again. So that's what makes teaching very interesting, because you've got that constant frenzy of 30 kids behind you, and kids need to believe in you, and you've got to work hard to get those relationships and trust in place before they'll do anything for you. And that will always exist regardless. And even if we're on computers in the future forever as a virtual school, which I don't ever see happening, but if we ever move back to that kind of method, you can see how relationships that we've all experienced online become a bit more difficult because we don't get that physical contact, or the non, I can go like that, which is a non-verbal signal, but in the classroom when I'm very close to you and I go like that, it means I'm much more, sorry for people listening, I'm doing the thumbs up on the camera. So you can kind of see how those, the physical presence adds much more value in and out of the classroom. But yeah, we're better at understanding all these things. And I guess, podcasts like yourself and blogs, people can share ideas with each other, which probably pushes us all on forward and quicker and makes us a better profession.
What you mentioned about there's certain things you can't follow up. And what I think we're also seeing is a lot of teachers that are becoming younger, that they're going through straight into PhD, straight into teaching. So a lot of life experience is lacking, but it's a lot of their life experience is still in education. How important would you say it's important for people, because they're not teachers just yet, would you say it's important for people to go out and experience life before they jump into teaching? That in essence, they can bring that experience into their classroom.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the vast majority of teachers are between 25 and 44 when you look at the teacher workforce data. I mean, obviously, I started when I was 19. You can get a lot of people straight out of degrees, straight in. So, most teachers are entering the classroom full time, whether it's through TeacherZ or something else, at the age of 21, 22. And it is very young. And if you think about the A-level student that you might be teaching at 18, 19, there's not much of a difference in terms of experience, I suppose. So the challenge, I suppose, at a kind of government level is how do, if I'm a 19, 22-year-old wanting to join the teaching profession, how do I engineer that I go off into industry for a couple of years, but I've got a ticket back into the classroom? Or I then go and work in for Microsoft and I end up loving it and think, well, I don't want to go in the classroom anymore. So there's loads of different ways and models, and different countries do different things. Australia, you get a sabbatical after certain years of service. So you get a paid leave, which is a great incentive. In some parts of the country also, you also get deployed to where you're most needed. So it's a bit like joining the military or the medical profession. You join to serve, or in the army, and you go where you're told to. So it really does become, you're giving your life to it. So the challenge is that's not for everyone. If you think about TeacherZ today, you can get deployed to another part of the country because you're serving disadvantaged kids. I suppose the other side of TeacherZ is that you've got that connection with business where many of them can leave and be set up with a kind of contract elsewhere, which might be an easy way for them to escape. But you'll never get it right. You can never cover all bases. I think going back to the question, it is important to get experience, but I don't know. I started when I was 19. I did 25 years, so I did it. I survived. And I guess as I got a bit older, I wanted to try something different. I got a bit frustrated sometimes that I was wanting to do a few different things. But I guess my industry experience is now I'm running a small, home business, but I'm still in education. And I guess I'm still, although I'm predominantly working with people in education industry, I'm seeing lots of other types of sector experience that can enrich me, that probably would have changed the way I was as a leader. Whether they changed the way I was as a teacher is another question, but certainly how I approach leadership. So I think in terms of, creating better schools with better leaders in, there's potentially something we need to think about in the future is how do we create really great leaders that work in education who have a teaching background, because we might find more efficient, more ethical, more productive types of schools, rather than everyone's chasing the exam grades and jumping into the Ofsted bandwagon just because we know we have to, when actually it's important. But if you're wise and brutal and develop broad shoulders, you can get to a place of confidence and wisdom where you can challenge it.
That brings me on perfect to the next one, which is, if you were made the Minister of Education, right? which is possible, Ross. You know, if you made the Minister of Education, Ross, what would you change? What would you do to help, improve?
There's so many things.
What's the number one thing you would love
Teachers
to
pay
change?
your ass.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there is that. I would reduce contact time, but that's going to, if you think about a teacher that teaches 25 lessons a week, divide their salary, you're looking at about £2,000 per lesson for the year. So, even if I give you 2 free periods, that's £4,000 per teacher times 500,000 teachers. And then you've got to find more teachers to teach those lessons that now they've got free periods for. Yeah. So whatever £4,000 is times 500,000 teachers, times it by 2, that's how much you need to pay on an annual basis on top of the already, I think the last time it was at £80 billion a year on education in England. So it's going to cost a lot of money, and the vast majority of that's on staffing. So yes, contact time, obviously salary. But there's lots of research say, great teaching is great teaching. Salary helps, but it doesn't make great teaching. But we also need to be a profession that entices great people into the classroom. People have got to be able to afford to live. And one thing, I suppose, is when you get older, you take on more commitments, you get children, mortgage. So you need a higher salary, which is why the government always choose to pay M1 to M6 scale, because they're cheaper and they replace themselves more often. Whereas experienced teachers who stay, they get more expensive, but they don't tend to leave because they rely on their salary, even though they get squeezed. And that's also why the government do a minimum payment, 1%, whatever it might have been the last time, because they know that was going to create a bigger cost than paying younger, cheaper teacher models who leave after 1 year and get replaced each time. So it costs very minimal to replace. So that's what I've discovered from the workload. But aside from the pay and salary stuff, my number one thing, and I hate to bring it up, but would be Ofsted grade in schools.
I agree.
And that'd be the one thing that I'd want to banish, because I think that it perpetuates inequality in our society. I've worked in special measures schools. I've got a special measures badge. I've got an outstanding badge. I was doing nothing different to the school next door. I've worked in the school where they put the outstanding banner on. We pat ourselves on the back. Aren't we brilliant? Look at them down the road in RI. But now I've seen a lot more schools and experienced them. We're all doing the exact same thing. It's largely, yes, there are little nuances. So what the leadership team decides to do, how they spend their money, etc. But predominantly the postcode, the admissions, the reputation of the school, the students' ability. Then we get into the whole Progress 8 myths about the bell curve, and you've made plus 1.5 progress. Well, that's compared against all the other kids who haven't. So every single year, some kids have to be above the bell curve and some have to be below, regardless. So it doesn't matter how hard you work or where you work, that will always happen. So there's all those kind of anomalies that many of us think within the system that need to be reformed. But the challenging thing is, what would you do instead? Because at least the assessment, exams and progress give us a baseline in order to treat all children fairly. So if I was a disadvantaged kid, if I show exponential progress over a period of time, then I do deserve the grade A, or I do deserve the ticket to Oxbridge. The challenge, I think we're getting better at. You look at university conversations, letting more diversity into Oxford, Cambridge, etc., increasing admissions, not getting into quotas, all that kind of conversation. We are getting better, but it's slow progress. And you get a lot more state school kids going to Russell Group universities than we did before. The diversity is improving. It's certainly not there yet. I just throw in the word gender. We've got a big gender thing to work out as a society. Our schools are doing great work. I don't think the society's caught up with what schools are doing. Schools are on the front line of all these issues. So it's complex. But for me, put me in a corner. Let's get rid of Ofsted gradings. I'd probably say, well, let's keep good and not yet good and leave it as that.
Yeah.
But you might end up finding that you've got the bell curve again. 50% of schools are good and 50% aren't, not yet good. But so then we got a problem, because all parents want a good school. All parents want like that reputation. Most parents tend to choose things that they believe in or people that are similar. You know, human beings, we like to find similar groups. So we're all getting on because we're teachers. I might like to go to the Scottish school because I'm Scottish, because we put a kilt on and we eat haggis. But you don't like haggis, so you won't go to that school because that's not what you believe. So we like to form groups and habits, and as human beings, we follow each other to a large extent. But you know, we think about diversity and how good ideas are spread. Good ideas spread from good, diverse voices. So when you've got a leadership table and it's just 10 Ross McGills around the table, white man, bald head, ideas are quite limited. And what's the group think? They all agree the same thing. Whereas if us four were a leadership team, we'd have quite a range of ideas, but we'd lack the female view. So there's all that type of stuff. But yeah, I'm rambling now. Ofsted grades, we need to get rid of it because I think it just makes things worse.
I think 99.9% of teachers.
I definitely agree.
They love that word.
I was going to. Oh,
Go.
I was going to say, touching on retention, even spoke about that. What advice or what solution would you give to a teacher that's teaching 5 years, 10 years, and they're at their end, they're almost burnt out? What advice would you give?
Yeah, the reason I left was I was already made a decision in 2017 that I didn't want to be a head teacher because my Teacher Toolkit stuff was really growing and I was making my salary on the side through the blog. So I thought, right, rather than me do it night and day after school hours, and I was getting thinly stretched as a deputy head and being a bit of a crap blogger, influencer, taking lots of money and contracts, thought, let me do it one day a week and 4 days in school. But then the Ofsted thing came, killed my school, my boss disappeared, you know, all that type of stuff. So I was forced to hand my resignation in, essentially, and say, right, I'm going to jump, I'm going to do it 5 days a week. I guess what I've learned from my travels is there's so many different types of schools across the country, and there's a lot more places than North London. And I love London. I lived there for 30 years. But we've got a beautiful country, and I've seen it from a train and a plane over the last 5 years all over the place. I guess going back to, you got to find a school that you love, people that you want to work in, you know, community that you enjoy, you got resources on your doorstep, you know, cinema and whatever else. But I think for those teachers that lose their mojo, especially in today's world, when I qualified on a blackboard and stuff, now we've got all fancy gadgets and we can do Zoom calls and I can have a side hustle and sell resources online and make a podcast. There's lots more opportunities for us all today. So in terms of teachers, I don't need to work 5 days a week anymore. And that's also a potential big problem for the future of recruitment and retention, because I can be a teacher, I can be qualified, but I'm teaching online.
Yes.
And I'm going to stay at home and do it. So I think we're going to see all this evolve rapidly, that the notion of having a teacher physically in a school is going to be questioned a lot more. The problem is we'll always need it. Why? Because the bigger society, parents have to go to work physically or not. Or even if I don't have to go to work, my son's still here. So he has to go to school. So he either does it virtually and he looks after himself or not. Or if he's 4, he can't. If he's 11, he can. Or I physically take him to school, drop him off, and I can get on with my work. So the nature of how we all work and live is evolving. And then that's going to slowly filter into what we view as a school. Will it be physical or virtual or blended? And I think that as the world evolves in post-pandemic and into more technology, it's going to change the notion of how we define the traditional teacher 5 days a week in a classroom. So I think what we're seeing now is a lot more experienced people do their side hustles, blogs, podcasts, and whatever else, write a book. So I've done all those things. Your newer teachers can copycat from what we've done. They're a bit more immersed with the technology because they've been born into it. And they're, you know, if you've got fewer commitments as a younger person, you know, no family, I suppose, and you can just, all your time is your own, you can spend night and day on technology. and create a little blog and hustle quite quickly alongside your day job to a point where it gives you another income and allows you to have your own choices. And that's where I find myself today. But I think across the country, the problem with recruitment and retention is that technology era we don't yet know. We can see things happening, but we don't yet know where it's going to take us and how it's going to change our working lives and habits. I think for the retention point that AB mentioned was, visit lots of schools, talk to people online. If I can't go and visit a teacher in Newcastle, I'll connect or watch someone in Newcastle or tune into into the classroom through a video link, and I can see and hear and get a virtual tour on Google. So it's a bit easier for us to experience and understand other aspects of where we live and work before we make a big commitment. So I guess the bubble conversation, when you're in your own school and it's pressurized or you're enjoying it, it's what I've come to learn, I suppose, is perspective. We all see the world differently. You can go in the same school, but people see it differently. But then just in England, we've got 25,000 schools. So there's a lot of schools. There's 500,000 teachers. There's 8.8 million kids in the country. So there's a big industry out there, and there's lots of kids learning online. I think I've been to China. I forgot the numbers off my top of my head, but I think we're talking about 100 million kids or something in the system. So times that by number of teachers or number of schools. England's tiny in comparison to the rest of the world. So, I haven't really talked about international teaching. I've seen thousands of British teachers internationally who have got a bit sick of the state system, the red tape, the bureaucracy. I went to Jordan last month, teachers in Jordan. One teacher's been there for 25 years. She's got her own apartment. She takes her child to the school, and the school pays 100% fees, which are £50,000 a year. And they've got a great lifestyle, fantastic food, car, apartments, brilliant weather every day. And they've got a community of friends, and the school pays for their flights once a year to come home, jump in the pool. So, it all depends on what you want and what you value in life and what you view as successful.
You was talking about diversity, having more of it in schools. And I was thinking, because schools nowadays, they thrive on their labels. So like grammar schools, for example, they thrive on the fact that they're a grammar school. But religious schools that they'll pop up in locations because there might be a higher intake of Christian, Muslim, Sikhs, whatever have you. Do you think, like me personally, I would like to know if that has an impact on diversity. Now, it's not to say that if you're not a Sikh, you can't go to the school, like you can go to wherever you want to, but I find that a lot of the time parents aren't really educated, or maybe they're a bit naive, or maybe they just don't really know that these things are possible. Do you think there should be more of an emphasis on schools pushing that diversity within the local communities?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I left London, and I now live in West Yorkshire, and the vast local community is pretty much white British or British Pakistani. And there's a primary school just next door that my son could or should have attended. It's 99% British Pakistani, but instead the local authority chose to send him to a further school with a bit more of a mix. It was predominantly white British. So in some respects, I blame, yes, the parents and me, but also the local authority for the responsibility to, in some respects, socially re-engineer communities. Otherwise, you have white British, British Pakistani not talking to each other. Yeah. Then all the myths perpetuate. We know what kids are getting in school. They're getting all the right messages. They're getting the diversity messages, the gender messages, and they, love thy neighbor. But then they go home and all the old biases are reinforced. The biggest issue, I think, is one, a bit of a council level, but two, parental demand. Some parents want their kids to go to a Sikh school, to a Christian school, to a Jewish school, a Muslim school, regardless. And it's because they know the school might promote their own religious values, and the children will be immersed around people who are similar, rather than what we all know is if I'm exposed to a more diverse range of views, religions, and skin color, I will learn over time to respond better to that and profit as an individual, but also benefit society, so that when I walk down the street and I see a large bloke like Rowan, I don't fall into all the stereotypes of, you know, bias and, oh, is he gonna jump me and all sorts of things. And because we're human beings, we all suffer from that and we all fall into those traps. So the more that we're exposed to people collectively and closely, and we develop relationships, we break down those barriers and myths, and we start to create bonds. And that phrase that always comes around, we've got more in common than we believe, don't we, as humans and groups and people. And, you know, we're all on the same planet. We all breathe and live and eat. We all go to sleep. We all eat. We all go to the toilet. We all do the same things. It's just we've got one or two different views. That's what makes the world sometimes interesting, sometimes violent, sadly, and whatever else. But we all know that the power of education and knowledge can break down some of those barriers, and that's what makes education so special.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. You know, your insights, honestly, like, and the common sense and the kind of ideas that you've got. Honestly, I mean, you should have gone to be a head teacher. I don't know why you stopped. You know, but the influence is much greater where you are. So I think we're all benefiting anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
No, honestly, I really, really, really appreciate your time, Ross. Thank you for allowing us to sort of like meet with you and talk to you, because I've gained so much actually from this meeting. It's been fantastic. Honestly, I've just learned so much as well. So yeah, I mean, I want to do it again as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Let's do it again. I'll give you some time to read that book and post some questions, and I'll interview you three next time, I think.
That sounds brilliant. I tell you what, yeah, definitely. We'll get the 10 episods out, then we put that one in.
Yeah. Yeah, so listeners, I've given them a target now. I'm trying to push their own blogging expertise here.
We'll do it within a week as well.
Right, I'm going to get a selfie while we're on.
Yeah, let's get a selfie.
Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah,
I'll ping you that over later. Right, thanks for having me. I'll see you online soon.
Yes, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank
See you
you very
later.
much.
Right.
Bye.